Ted wearily opened his eyes a few hours later and saw that it was after 8 a.m. He used the bathroom and splashed some water on his face. Shrugging into his suit jacket, he lugged his bags to his car and drove to his office. It was early, and he thought that he might avoid everyone. He slipped into his office and wrote a brief letter of resignation which he intended to place on John Brock's desk, but was surprised to see that Brock was already in. "Ted, what's wrong? You look like hell?" John exclaimed, seeing Ted's haggard appearance. "John, please, do me a big favor and don't ask any questions," Ted replied as he passed his letter of resignation over the desk. John looked at it and looked up at Ted. "What the heck is going on? Don't tell me not to ask questions. I don't deserve a statement like that. We're supposed to be friends, or am I wrong about that?" Ted seemed to sag a bit. "You're right, John. We are friends, but please, I just can't talk about it. I have to leave, and I have to leave today." And he turned to do just that. "Wait, Ted. Okay, I won't ask you anything, but I'm going to rip up this letter. Take a leave of absence, okay? You can do that, can't you?" Ted hesitated and then nodded. "Thanks, John," he mumbled as he left the office. He didn't see the worry and concern on his friend's face. Ted then went to his bank and withdrew $10,000 from a money market account and bought a stack of traveler's checks. He checked his watch and saw that he had 20 minutes to get to his appointment with Carl Ballard. He made it with 5 minutes to spare. "Carl, I've known you for over 15 years. You've taken care of all of my legal concerns, and I'm here to ask a huge favor of you. I know that you don't usually handle divorce cases, but I'm asking you to handle mine. Wait, don't say anything yet. I know that you're going to ask a million questions of me, but no, now, I'm not going to answer any questions. I've made out a check for $5,000 as a retainer, and I want you to draw up a power of attorney which will give you authority to act in my behalf. You will, in all likelihood, not hear from me again. So just do what you think is best. If something comes up which is critical, you know my email, but please, Carl, no contact with me unless it is critical. Use irreconcilable differences as a reason and let it go at that. Give Barbara whatever she wants. I really don't care." Ted sat back, seemingly exhausted. Carl Ballard just sat and looked at him in amazement. "Ted, you lay this on me, and you don't want me to ask any questions? You really take a lot for granted, and a power of attorney to act in your behalf? You have that much trust in me?" Ted nodded. "Will you just please do as I ask, Carl? Please." Ballard saw the almost desperate need in his friend's eyes and bit his lip and sighed. "Okay, Ted. I hope that someday you'll see fit to let me know what precipitated this. In the meantime, give me a little time and I'll get some paperwork for you to sign." Ted rose. "Thanks, Carl. I'll be back in a couple of hours and sign whatever. I need to take care of a couple of things." Ted left Ballard's office and headed home. He knew that Barbara would be at the hospital, volunteering, as she did every Friday. It felt strange, all that he was doing this morning, almost like out-of-body experiences. He went through the necessary motions, but it was as if he was observing someone else. It was like he was just along for the ride. Ted entered his house and went into the kitchen. He placed the note to his wife on the table and, as an afterthought, took off his ring and placed that on the note. He then proceeded up the stairs and quickly packed another suitcase. Moving into his study, he saw that the sofa bed was now in its closed position. He suddenly felt lightheaded again and fought back a touch of nausea. Quickly grabbing some personal folders, he exited the room and minutes later was out of the house. Parking in the parking garage and before going up to Ballard's office again, Ted called his children. He found it interesting that they were not totally shocked by the news that he was leaving their mother. They had both grown up with the bickering and arguments. They had both somewhat anticipated that something like this could occur. Ted said nothing about his discovery Thursday, just said that it was time for their mother and he to move on, reassuring them that he loved them and would stay in touch. He breathed a sigh of relief that that chore was over. Ted signed whatever was put in front of him by Ballard, shook his hand, and was out of the door and in his car about 30 minutes later. He made sure that he had a full tank of gas and headed for the bridge into New Jersey, where he picked up I-295 South. As he drove, he felt some of the tension leave him. It was as if he had ended one life and was beginning a new one. The sorrow and grief would always be with him, he knew, but maybe he could bury it and move on. He also knew, deep down, that he was running away and he didn't care. It was the coward's way out, and he didn't care. Heck it. Barbara Arnold sat at her kitchen table, her husband's letter lying at her feet. Her face was ashen and her eyes wide with shock. She stared ahead of her without seeing. She had no idea how much time had gone by since she had entered the house. Her mind couldn't grasp what she had just read. She just sat, numb and unfeeling. The ringing of the phone startled her, and she automatically reached for it. "Hello," she answered, her voice flat and emotionless. "Barbara, is that you?" And questioned, concern evident in her tone. "Hello," Barbara repeated. She then allowed the phone to drop from her hand. She looked at the broken instrument on the floor and wondered what it was. Her eyes then moved to the letter lying near the phone, and a puzzled expression covered her face. She tried to recall what the sheet of paper contained. She knew that it was important. Suddenly, her face seemed to screw into a horrible grimace, and she started to whimper, and soon her mewling turned to sobs. She sat and cried until she thought that her heart would break, and then she sobbed some more. "Barbara, Barbara, where are you?" shouted, and as she burst through the unlocked front door. Dashing into the kitchen, she saw her friend at the table, her eyes red and swollen, her nose running and her hair disheveled. "Barb, what happened? What's wrong?" Her friend was now almost yelling. She then saw the letter on the floor and immediately stooped, picked it up and read it, and blanched and saw exactly what was wrong, and an expression of pity and sympathy came to her eyes. Barbara's sobs had subsided a bit, and she was trying to catch her breath, and moistened a dish towel and gave it to Barbara. "Wipe your face, honey, and catch your breath. You have to take hold of yourself," she said softly. "Why, Ann? I can't believe this. We were getting back on track. Things were going so well for us. I know he loves me, and I know he does," Barbara cried out as she tried to control her emotions. "Barb, right now you have to get over the shock of what has just happened to you." She rummaged through her handbag. "Here, take one of mine. It will help calm you," and filled a glass of water and made Barbara swallow the pill. She then led Barbara to her bedroom and made her lie down. "Get some rest, Barb. I have to get back to work, but I will stop by after work and bring some dinner for the two of us. I'm going to plan to stay here tonight so that you won't be alone. Don't worry, honey. Just get some rest." Barbara nodded, sighed, and closed her eyes, and stood for a moment and then turned and made her way to her car. An hour or so later, and was having a late lunch with Matt Weeks and was telling him what had happened in the Arnold household. "I'm really worried about Barbara, Matt," and said softly, "I don't know how she's going to hold up." Matt sat and listened, concern evident on his face. He had come to like the Arnolds and considered them friends, especially since and was so close to Barbara. He then seemed a bit puzzled and interrupted in, "Honey, wasn't Ted supposed to return from his trip this evening? How come he was in his house early this morning? He obviously came back early, but why didn't he let Barbara know that? The timing just seems a bit strange," Matt said contemplatively. He shook his head and continued, "I totally agree with you. Go over to Barbara's place tonight and plan to stay with her for the weekend. I think that she will really need some support," and gazed at him fondly. "You really are a special man, Matt. Thank you. That's what I had intended. I'll call you from Barbara's," and responded as she rose to leave. Matt continued to sit for a few moments. He had a strange expression on his face. His mind was working with the information he had been given by, and he felt a very icy feeling in the pit of his stomach. With a start, Matt saw that it was late and quickly walked to the elevators and made his way to his office. Closing the door, he pulled a telephone book from the shelf and flipped the pages until he came to what he was seeking. He picked up the phone and dialed. "Hello, Pinkerton Security and Investigations. How may I direct your call?" Later that day, Ted had stopped to fill up with gas south of Richmond, Virginia. He saw an Army-Navy store across the road and made a snap decision. While he realized that he had packed suits and dress shirts, he now realized that he would no longer need that mode of dress. He made his way to the store and outfitted himself with khaki pants, denim jeans, plaid shirts, athletic socks, and a sturdy pair of plain, brown shoes. On the way to pay for his purchases, he pulled a plain, beige baseball cap from a rack and included in the pile on the counter. He paid for his purchase and was soon on his way, but he had decided to no longer use the interstate. He looked at his map and made a decision to use only the blue routes. the secondary routes that were shown in blue on the map. He chose a road and headed west. He drove through small towns and hamlets, making sure to obey all the speed limits. He stopped at small motels along the way and ate at mom and pop spots when he was hungry. He was amazed at the quality of the food served to him. It had none of the institutional taste of the major chains. This was down-home cooking. Servings were huge, hot, and tasted wonderful. The third day out, Ted stopped for breakfast at a small eatery with a sputtering neon sign out front trying to spell out, "Mom's Kitch." The inn was burnt out, and it didn't look like anyone was going to give that sign any attention anytime soon. He entered the place and saw a few booths along the window wall and a short counter with 5 stools. He took a seat next to a grizzled old-timer who turned to look him over. The waitress, who didn't look like any mom he remembered, took his order and brought him a steaming cup of strong coffee. He took a sip and heard the old-timer address him. "Howdy." The voice was gravely and deep. Ted nodded and returned the greeting. "Where are you headed?" the old guy asked. Ted turned to him and noticed his eyes. They were a piercing blue and weary, as if he had seen things better left to the imagination. "West," Ted replied briefly. The old guy nodded, as if expecting such an answer. Moments later, he continued. "Where you coming from?" he questioned. Ted felt a flush of irritation creep up. Why the F questions, he thought. He turned to his tormentor and with a shrug, answered. "East," he said dismissively. Ted was relieved to see his breakfast then placed before him, and he dug into the eggs and sausages. He spent the next few minutes assuaging his hunger, thanking the waitress who came to refill his coffee cup. "You're running. It ain't gonna work, buddy. Been there. Done that. I'm here to tell ya. It don't work. It all catches up to ye." Ted turned to him, ready to snarl, when he again saw the old guy's eyes. There were unshed tears there, and Ted suddenly felt uneasy and apprehensive. He threw some money on the counter and left quickly, not turning around. Seconds later, he was again on the road. "What the F?" Ted muttered to himself. "Is everyone a goddamn Sigmund Freud? Damn bum, giving me advice. I really need that now." But the old-timer's remarks kept haunting him, gnawing at his subconscious as he drove. He knew, deep down, that he was running away. He knew that it was stupid, but he just couldn't face the situation now. Or was it that he just didn't want to? Ted also began to realize that added to the sorrow and grief was another emotion, anger. Not a burning, searing rage, but a tired, empty sense of bitterness. His mind kept going back to the 2 incidents that almost caused him to leave Barbara. He now pretty well knew that they weren't isolated events, only things that he had managed to catch her at. She had been very clever throughout their years together. He had never really suspected that she was having affairs, but she must have been cheating from the start. Ted then froze and had to pull over to the side of the road. He was trembling, breathless. He had suddenly come to the realization that his children may not even be his own. "Oh, my God," he screamed. "Oh, that be," he shrieked. He felt the nausea return and barely made it out of the car before vomiting his breakfast by the side of the road. The tears started again, and he fought them back and gained some control. No more tears for what was, he vowed. "Time to move on," he muttered to himself. The next few days passed in a blur of shabby motels and small eateries along the road. He was sorely tempted, many times, to stop at the bars or saloons he noticed, lit up with dying spots, as he drove by in the evenings. But he knew the danger of driving drunk. He would not travel down that road. He didn't relish a night in jail for drunkenness. Ted passed a sign announcing the Nevada border, and on a sudden impulse decided to visit Las Vegas. The lights and noise of Sin City could prove distracting, something that he sorely needed at the moment. A few hours later, he cruised into town, but had absolutely no idea what was where. His senses were a bit overwhelmed by the bright streets and the crowds. He saw up ahead the entrance to the Golden Nugget and decided that it looked like a good stop. Checking in, Ted carried his own bag to his room and immediately went to the wide window which overlooked the city. "Geez, it's like the Emerald City," he thought to himself as he stood, entranced by the town below him. He quickly washed and changed into a pair of slacks and polo shirt. Making his way down to the casino, he was momentarily confused by the cacophony, lighting, and mass of people milling about. The damn place looked like a scene out of Dante's Inferno. Ted bypassed the slots, which were ringing and jangling and almost as noisy as the patrons jumping in front of them. He then noticed the poker room, to which is quickly headed, and found an haven of relative quiet. He stood and watched for a few moments, and then moved to a table in the corner where a group of 5 were playing Texas Hold'em. Besides the dealer, he saw 4 older men who seemed more than half-lit, and an attractive woman who appeared to be in her mid or late 30s. Ted smiled as he saw quickly that the men had no idea what they were doing, and that the woman was slowly and efficiently taking them for a ride. It was obvious that she was a skilled poker player, and just as obvious that the men there, while loud and overbearing, had no idea that the little lady was taking them for a ride. Ted moved to the table and took a seat, throwing some money at the dealer in exchange for chips. One of the jerks at the table chortled, "Well, some new blood. Now it's time for us to play some real poker, guys." Ted smiled and caught the eye of the gal at the table, who smiled in return. After about 2 hours at the table, Ted was up around $800. It was almost like taking candy from a baby. The 4 old farts chased after hands, kept playing poor cards, and were easy as hell to bluff. He learned that the woman's name was Gail, and she was a resident of Las Vegas. It wasn't long before the jerks at the table gave up in disgust and left the game. Both Ted and Gail decided not to compete against each other and rose to leave. Gail smiled up at him and remarked, "Now that was an interesting few hours." Ted laughed. "You mean a profitable few hours. How much did you take them for, if I may ask?" "About $1,200 or a little better. A good night's work. There are always idiots like those guys around. They just won't believe that a woman can beat their pants off, and I almost always take them to the cleaners." She grinned and continued, "I'm having a drink for the road. Care to join me?" The last thing in the world Ted wanted right now was to develop any kind of relationship with any female, but this seemed innocent, and he was sure that he would never see her again. "Sure, Gail. A drink before bed would be good." Gail glanced up at him again and grinned at the double entendre. Ted, recognizing the innuendo, turned a bit red and just shook his head. He smiled sheepishly, and she assured him that she understood his meaning. They sat in a booth at the lounge, enjoying the small quartet and sipping their drinks. Ted learned that Gail was a single mom with a 12-year-old daughter, and she made a very comfortable living doing just what she was doing this evening. "If tonight was an example of what happens every time you play, I'm sure that you do very well," Ted said. "Tonight was a little better than usual, but I still do very well. Didn't someone once say that there's AS born every minute?" Gail laughed. After another drink and another half hour of conversation, Gail rose to leave, saying that she had to get up early to get her daughter off to school. She shook his hand and then met his eyes and said softly, "Ted, I hope that whatever is wrong is made right one day. You may not realize it, but you're wearing your heart on your sleeve. Someone has obviously hurt you badly, and I hope that you can find some peace soon." With that, she turned and walked away from him. Ted just stood there, his mouth agape. "What the F?" he thought to himself. "Do I have the word C written on my forehead?" he wondered. He shook his head again and headed to his room. He didn't think he would be able to get much sleep, but to his relief he nodded off quickly and didn't open his eyes again until mid-morning. The next day saw Ted cruising the Strip and visiting the various casino hotels along that storied corridor. He was again amazed at the concept that was Las Vegas. Nothing was spared in order to capture the visiting dollars. Each casino seemed the same. The slots, the blackjack tables, roulette, etc. No windows and few exits. By evening, he had tired of his excursion and made his way back to the Nugget. He caught a quick dinner at the hotel and wandered the casino floor. Ted felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to find Gail smiling up at him.
Ted.
"Going to try your luck at the table again?" Ted was glad to see her. "Maybe later, Gail. You have a game tonight?" he asked. "Yep, a big one. This could make my year, if I'm lucky. My daughter is at a friend's house tonight, so I can stay late." "Wish me luck," she grinned and turned to saunter into the poker room. Ted smiled after her and thought about another round of poker. Perhaps he could join her in her game, but then realized that he could be a distraction to her and unwanted competition. He wandered the casino floor, played a little blackjack, and shot some craps, winding up with pretty much what he started with. Passing the dollar slots, he, on a sudden impulse, changed some bills into coins and started playing the machine. not paying too much attention to what he was doing. His mind kept returning to the same question. It was always the why. Why had she so betrayed him, and also, how long had she been doing that? He felt pretty certain now that the 2 times he had actually caught her were probably just the tip of the iceberg. How many other times had she cheated? He knew that one day he would have to face her and get the truth, as painful as he knew it would be. In the meantime, he hoped that distance and time would help, at least in small part, heal the hurt that was tearing at him. Suddenly it seemed as if all hell had broken out. Bells were ringing, whistles blowing, and strangers banging him on the back. Ted turned around, confused as to what had happened, and found a huge man shaking him by the hand while flash cameras almost blinded him. "Congratulations, my friend. You just hit a sizable jackpot," the giant shouted to him. "Follow me, please." With that said, the tuxedoed Goliath led him to the lobby and down a thickly carpeted hallway. Seconds later, Ted found himself ensconced in a deep, leather easy chair in front of a mammoth desk behind which the huge man seated himself. The door opened behind Ted, and a trim and well-dressed woman in her 40s, Ted guessed, entered. "Let me introduce myself and Tess to you. I'm Harry Davis, casino manager, and this lovely thing is Tess Lewinsky." Tess smiled at Ted and shook his rather limp hand. Tess is an attorney and a CPA and is in charge of this end of the business. We have other personnel like Tess on duty at all times. Now let's get down to business in regard to just what you've won. You're a guest here, so I already know your name, Mr. Arnold. The forms in front of you are the standard ones we use for this purpose. Sign where Tess tells you to, and we can get this paperwork out of the way. Tess Lewinsky proceeded to inform Ted as to exactly what he was signing and the purpose of each of the forms as Harry Davis sat smiling and puffing on a rather large cigar. "Okay, that's out of the way, thank goodness," Harry boomed. "This is the part one just love. I can tell by just looking at you, Ted, that you have no idea in the world what it is that you've won." Harry grinned at the blank expression on Ted's face. "Okay, Ted, with all of the withholding taken and the other fees and shit, you've won exactly," and Harry looked at the check in front of him, $674,566 and some change. "Not bad for a few coins in a machine," he laughed. Ted sat there, totally befuddled. "I'll be a son of A.B., he muttered to himself. He realized that life just threw him another curveball and, for the life of him, he just couldn't make sense of it all. "Ted," continued Harry Davis, "this is just a suggestion, but I would strongly advise you to deposit this check immediately into a money market account. We have a branch of a major national bank here at the hotel, and the account can be opened and the deposit handled quickly and easily. Believe me, you would be well advised to do that." Ted quickly saw the wisdom of that. "Good idea, Harry. Let's do that right now. I can take care of that for you, Mr. Arnold. There will be just a few more forms to take care of," remarked Tess Lewinsky. She was quick and efficient, and in a few more minutes he found himself with well over $500,000 in a money market account. Ted turned to Harry Davis. "Harry, how much publicity will winning this jackpot stir up? Am I going to have to avoid the press for the next few days?" Harry laughed. "You have to be kidding, Ted. This is not unusual. All of the casinos in this town often have jackpot winners. It's good publicity for us, and it keeps the customers coming back. I doubt that your win will even make the local paper, let alone anything national," he observed keenly. After a few more details, Ted, in somewhat of a daze, made his way up to his room. He opened the minibar and had a scotch and water which he sipped as he sat and tried to make some sense out of just what happened. He again shook his head in wonderment and was then startled to hear a knock at his door. "Gail," Ted said with some surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here."
Ted.
"Well, aren't you going to ask me in?" Gail grinned at him saucily. "Oh, of course. Sorry about that," Ted mumbled, surprise still evident on his face. With a sparkle in her eyes, Gail continued to toy with him. "I see you have a drink, Ted. You going to offer me one?" Ted stood and looked at her for a moment before moving to the bar and getting her a drink. He held the glass in his hand for a bit before handing it to her and then commented, "Word gets around quickly, doesn't it?" Gail grinned at him, but there was just a bit of anger and disappointment in her eyes. "You really think that I'm here in your room because you hit a jackpot? I guess I really shouldn't blame you." You don't know me or what kind of person I am. Gail plopped herself down on the bed and raised the glass to Ted in salute before taking a sip. Ted, let me explain something to you. I would have been here, jackpot or not. I do very well financially, as you have seen, and I don't have to sell my body for a few bucks. I'm here because I like you, and for some reason, I trust you. I trust you to take this no further than it deserves. She looked at him intently as she stood and placed her glass on the end table. She was wearing a slinky, black dress held up by spaghetti straps which she loosened. The dress fell to the floor and she stood there in underwear. Ted sat speechless. His senses were saturated. Too many amazing events had buffeted him within the last hours, and he found it difficult to sort them out. He was not so far gone as to not recognize that this woman had a fabulous body. Gail reached behind here and unclasped the bra which fluttered to the floor. Ted's eyes flickered over her body. Gail moved to him, placing her forearms on his shoulders. This is my life, Ted. I refuse to involve myself with any man on any long-term basis, so I take opportunities when they arise, and you're just such an opportunity. Are you easy, Ted? Gail saw the stupefied expression on Ted's face and laughed easily. I think I shocked you, didn't I? Ladies aren't supposed to take the lead in the game, isn't that so? So what do you say? While Ted's mind had finally started to function, he still felt confused and conflicted. His hands were on Gail's waist, and as he moved to kiss her, he noticed a small mole on the side of her neck, just under her jawline. Barbara had just such a mole in the exact place. He realized, and he then totally lost it. Without any warning, he broke down and completely lost control of his emotions. Whether it was the accumulation of the traumatic events of the day, or the reoccurring and crushing realization of his wife's infidelity, he shuddered and the tears came. He made an almost violent attempt to control his grief, but without success. Gail, instead of leaping to her feet, just cradled his head and allowed him to purge those emotions so deeply felt. The tears finally came to an end, and Ted poured out to her the torment that was plaguing him. He finally leaned back, emotionally exhausted. They both then recognized the incongruity of the situation, and Gail moved, found the hotel robe which she slipped over her shoulders, and sat down on the edge of the bed. Ted? Gail asked. You've been carrying this around for the last couple of weeks? Don't you realize how foolish you've been? Ted just looked at her, wondering what she was talking about. Foolish, he repeated.
I'm foolish.
Why would you say that? What did I do that was so foolish? Gail smiled at him sympathetically. Ted, you have to sit down and talk to your wife. You have to confront the situation. You'll solve nothing by running away. Sure, it's the easy way now, but later you'll be sorry that you never gave her the opportunity to explain herself. Look, Ted, you may be, and probably are, correct as to the circumstances that led to your flight, but you'll always have a little nagging doubt about the situation. At least give yourself the opportunity to prove yourself right, and give your wife the opportunity to tell her side, even if she doesn't have a defense. At least you'll get some closure. Running only prolongs your agony. You'll drive yourself crazy. Go back and face her. Find some resolution. Ted again shook his head. I can't, Gail. I just can't go back now. It's too raw. I know that I'm being a coward, but I can't help it. What I need is some time. Time to collect myself and get my head straight. I know that you're right and that I will eventually have to go back, but right now I need some time for myself. I need to find someplace where I can just be alone and get some sanity back into my head. Gail gazed at him with pity in her eyes. Okay, Ted. I just wish you luck. You seem like a nice guy. I hope that things work out for you. But now I need to get dressed and out of here. I don't think that you're in the mood for anything romantic right now, she grinned. Ted checked out the following morning and headed south. For some reason, he didn't feel like dawdling. He wanted to get to where he was going quickly, the only problem being that he really didn't know where he wanted to go. He was still filled with a mass of conflicting emotions, and he did know that he needed the time to sort himself out. He found himself on RT-93 and just followed it south. Seeing signs for Phoenix and Tucson, he decided that he would head that way. Approximately 7 hours later, he pulled into Tucson, now hungry and tired. Ted saw a courtyard hotel not far ahead and decided to stop. He checked in, took the elevator to his room, and flopped on the bed. Well, he thought to himself, I'm here. Now what? Is this what I want? traveling from place to place? He shook his head in exasperation. He then washed his face, combed his hair, and went over to a diner he noticed across the road from the hotel. Despite the early hour, the place was relatively busy. Sniffing the enticing aromas from the kitchen, Ted began to understand why this place was bustling. Taking a seat at the counter, he examined the menu and gave his order to the waitress. He noticed the patron beside him munching down what looked like a Cobb salad with what looked like dry toast. Looking back at him with a wry smile on his face, the diner remarked, "Looks like rabbit food, doesn't it? I'm supposed to be on a diet, but I'm not sure how long it's going to last before I start growing long ears." "You don't look all that heavy," Ted chuckled while looking the guy over casually. "Yeah, you're not married to a nutritionist. She monitors everything I eat, and she insists that I lose 5 pounds. Hey, I'm really not complaining. I know that she loves me and wants me to be healthy, so I go along." Ted felt a wave of sadness wash over him. He smiled at the man and turned as the waitress put his order of a small steak and baked potato in front of him. He was hungry and dug in quickly, polishing off the meal in a matter of minutes. "Wow," said his dining companion. "You must have been starving. By the way, I'm Bud Troop. I own the real estate agency up the street," and extended his hand. Ted shook the proffered hand and had a sudden idea. "I'm Ted Arnold, Bud, and this accidental meeting may be beneficial for both of us. You're in real estate, and I'm looking for some temporary lodging. A small house, perhaps, with a lot of privacy. On the edge of town, maybe, totally furnished, something like that? Any ideas?" Ted asked, realizing that he was now flying by the seat of his pants. Bud Troop looked at Ted more carefully now, doubt evident on his face. "I may have something, Ted, but I have to tell you that what you want may be very pricey. How much do you want to spend?" Ted's gaze was steady as he replied, "Price is not a problem, Bud. If you want to do some business, just show me what you have, and if I like it, price won't be a consideration." Bud blinked a couple of times and smiled. He again realized that first impressions in his business were not always accurate. At first glance, he just assumed that this guy looked a little down on his luck. He looked like he sure didn't have the resources to handle what he said he wanted. Well, Bud recognized, he had been wrong before and could very well be wrong now. They made an appointment to meet the next morning at Bud's office and would go to examine a couple of prospects that Bud thought might fill Ted's need. Early the next morning, Bud drove Ted out to a development on the edge of town and bordering a vast desert area. The house was an adobe ranch with a starkly landscaped lot. It was located at the end of the block with only one other house nearby, separated by about 20 feet of cacti and century plants. There was a 2-car garage and a large alcove which led to the front door. Instead of entering right away, Bud took Ted around to the back. The view of the rear caused Ted's eyes to widen a bit. The back of the house was shaded by a deep overhang. Comfortable and durable outdoor furniture was scattered over the area and around a deep blue Olympic-sized swimming pool. The view across the landscape was breathtaking. A long stretch of desert finally ending, some miles away, in a stunning mountain range. The interior contained 2 spare bedrooms and a master suite that was almost sybaritic in its luxury. After a quick examination of the rest of the house, Ted had made up his mind. "Bud, this looks perfect. I hope that I can lease it on a month-to-month basis, and I suspect that I'll be here for at least 3 months. Ted, I'm really sorry, the owner wanted a year lease, but I think that I could get him to go for a 6-monther, especially if the price is right. Also, you didn't ask about the cost. Don't you think that should be discussed?" Bud asked with some surprise. Ted didn't quibble when Bud told him what the owner wanted, and he quickly accepted a 6-month lease on the place. He also informed Bud that he wanted to move in ASAP and would give him a check for the entire 6 months when they returned to the office. Bud agreed, and the details were quickly ironed out in a couple of hours. 2 days later, Ted found himself comfortably installed in what he was beginning to think of as his dream house. For the first time in a while, he felt at peace, and he believed that he would be able to come to some kind of decision about his marriage, or to be more accurate, a decision about how to end his marriage. He had already come to the conclusion that there was no way he could forgive her. There was no way that he could accept her betrayal. Ted was also aware that at the present, he had no stomach for a confrontation. He just didn't want to face the turmoil that awaited him. He just wanted a little peace and quiet to nurse his wounds. He knew that he was being cowardly, but he just didn't care. He just wanted time. Time to be by himself for a while. Time to heal. Time passed quickly and days seemed to blend into each other. Life was peaceful for Ted. He joined a local country club and was now playing golf almost daily. He had met a few people with whom he had become friendly, but he really didn't want to form any close ties to anyone. So it was always a hello, a drink at the bar perhaps, and a casual wave goodbye. He did become a bit close with Bud Troop and his wife June. They were nice people, and he saw them on a somewhat regular basis. Ted was more or less content. It was a time for introspection. He had made a decision about his marriage. He knew that it was over, and for some strange reason he found that the sorrow and pain had eased considerably. He now wondered whether he had ever really loved Barbara fully, and if not, why not? He began to feel the need to return, the need for closure. He had received emails from his attorney informing him that Barbara was putting up objections to the divorce and was delaying as much as she could. Ted was advised that a contested divorce could prove very messy. He knew that after 2 months in Tucson he would have to make plans to return, but he was lethargic. He couldn't take the steps to do that just yet. It was about at this time that Matt Weeks picked up the phone and called his fiancée, and, "Hi Ann, it's me. Look, I want you to do something for me. Call Barbara Arnold and set up a time for the three of us to talk. No, please, no questions right now. See if she can see us this evening. Okay? Good, thanks honey." Some hours later saw the three friends seated in Barbara's living room. She had made coffee which sat on a tray before them, not touched. Matt marveled at Barbara's appearance. Despite her sorrow and distress, she still managed to keep up a wonderful appearance. She was dressed nicely, makeup applied well, and not a hair out of place. If one didn't know the circumstances, one could almost think that not a thing was amiss. "Okay, Matt," Barbara began. "What's the mystery?" And called and said you wanted to talk to me. What's up? Matt looked pensive for a moment and then began. "Barbara, even and doesn't know what the purpose of this is, and I guess I had better start at the beginning. I'm pretty sure that I know what precipitated your marital crisis, and no, it's not that Ted had found someone else to take your place, Barb." Barbara had paled, and her hand went to her chest involuntarily. She saw Matt wave his hand, indicating that he wanted to continue. "Barbara, think back to the day that you found that note. Ted wasn't even supposed to be here that morning. He was due to arrive the evening of that day. So it's obvious that he came in early, and I'm guessing that he actually arrived the evening before to surprise you. Entered the house that night, and I'm pretty sure that he heard Ann and I in the study and thought that you were in there with another man." Both Barbara and Ann gasped, and was stricken with remorse and guilt while Barbara just sat there, stunned, not knowing how to now handle the information given her. "My God, Barb, I'm so sorry. I never even imagined this scenario, but Matt could very well be right," and stammered, distress evident in her voice. "Okay, I'm not finished. Please let me continue," Matt said firmly. "I had an agency attempt to trace Ted's whereabouts, and they finally came through. I know where he is, and I'm going to fly out and speak with him. He doesn't know that I'm coming. Please don't ask me for his location. Just let me handle this. I kind of feel responsible for this whole mess, and I'd really like to be the one to clear it up." Barbara just sat there, fearing the hope that had welled up in her. Could it be this easy, this simple to repair their relationship? Could Matt really fix this and bring Ted home? "Matt," Barbara said softly, "I'll do whatever you ask. I can only pray that Ted listens to and believes you. I don't want to get my hopes up too high. I know how stubborn he can be, but he likes and respects you. I just hope that you can get through to him." "Matt," Barbara then pleaded, "could you, please, take this along with you when you see Ted?" She then took Ted's wedding band from the chain around her neck and handed it to him. Approximately 36 hours later, Ted was sitting at his pool, enjoying a morning cup of coffee when his front doorbell rang. He turned in surprise. He rarely had visitors. Walking to the door, he was shocked to find Matt Weeks standing there, a small smile on his face.
Ted.
"I know that you're surprised to see me. Can I come in?" Matt asked. Ted quickly got over his shock and replied, "Of course, Matt. This is quite a surprise. Please, come in. Can I ask how you found me?" "It wasn't easy, Ted. It took months, you moved around a bit, but that's really not what's important. What's important is the reason why I'm here." Ted smiled wryly. I think I know why you're here, Matt. Do me and yourself a big favor. Don't try to be a marriage counselor. It really won't work. While it's nice to see you, I think that you wasted your trip. Barbara and I are finished.
No, Ted.
I'm not here as a counselor. I just want to give you some information that you don't have. Please, just listen for a few minutes, okay? Okay, Matt. Let's go into the den. Do you want something to drink or a snack or something? Matt shook his head. I just want to get this done. Matt then proceeded to give Ted the same information he had given Barbara. It didn't take long. Matt finished and looked at Ted searchingly. Ted just sat there in disbelief, astonished. Are you telling me the truth, Matt? He asked, his voice rising. I went through this torture because you and were in that room? My whole life was turned upside down by a mistake? Ted rose suddenly and he snarled at Matt. Did Barbara put you up to this? This sounds like something she would come up with. I can't believe that you would go along with her. I had more respect for you than that. Ted was livid and totally confused and bewildered. Matt had arisen with Ted and now clasped his shoulders. I was right. You were home that evening and you did hear and end me, didn't you? You thought it was Barbara and another guy, and that's why you left and disappeared. God damn it, Matt. I'm telling you the truth. I swear on everything that's holy. It's the honest truth. Ted sank back in his chair, his legs giving out on him. He shook his head, trying to absorb and understand what Matt had told him and what he was now saying. My God, he muttered. My God, what have I done? I turned everything to S. Why didn't I just break into that room? All of this could have been avoided. How can I face Barbara? She must hate my guts. Ted just sat, holding his head in his hands, trying to come to grips with what Matt had told him. Ted, Matt said compassionately, don't worry about Barbara hating you. When I left, she was praying that you would return to her. She loves you, Ted. She gave me this to give to you. She had been wearing it on a chain around her neck. Matt then held out Ted's wedding band. Ted just looked at it blankly, seemingly frozen in place. He slowly accepted the ring and almost absently placed it back on his finger where it had resided for so many years. The two men spent the rest of the day alternating between deep conversations and long periods of silence. Ted was grateful for Matt's presence. He was glad that there was someone there with him, someone with whom he was able to talk. As night fell, Matt arose from his chair and said, Ted, it's late. I have a room near the airport and my flight leaves early in the morning. I have to call a cab. Forget the cab, Matt. I'll drive you. It's not all that far and it'll give me a chance to get out of the house. I can use the fresh air. The drive did not take long and Matt hesitated a bit before exiting the car. Ted, what should I tell Barbara? She knows that I'm here talking to you. Ted hesitated for a moment. Tell her that I have to wrap up some things here and that I'll drive back sometime next week. I should get there by the end of next week, and when I do, we'll sit down together and talk. Something I should have done a long time ago, Ted said ruefully. He then sat for a bit as he watched Matt enter the doors of the hotel. 2 days later, Ted found that he couldn't sit still. His anxiety and impatience to leave finally got the better of him. He called the airline and got an evening flight out. Packing a small overnight bag, he made it to the airport in plenty of time and fidgeted and changed position frequently during the flight. Fortunately, he didn't have a seat mate. It was well after 10 p.m. when the plane finally landed, and he was able to exit the airport and retrieve the rental car waiting for him. His thoughts were still random and unformed. He had just decided to let things develop and see how he and Barbara could put their lives back together. He pulled into his driveway around 11 o'clock and saw the house dark. He breathed a sigh of relief when he noticed a dim light in the master bedroom. Barbara was still up. He used his key and let himself in quietly. He moved to the stairs and hesitated when he heard voices coming from the second floor. The blood chilled in his veins as he silently climbed the stairs. The master bedroom door was only slightly ajar, not allowing him a view of the interior of the room, but he heard the conversation therein quite clearly. Damn it, Phil. I keep telling you. Tell'll be home next week, and we have to cool it for at least a few months. I have to get my marriage back on track. Heck, Barb, we've been doing for almost 2 years. It's not going to be easy for me, he whined. So help yourself a lot, Phil, she laughed. Look, I've told you a dozen times. I love my husband, and I don't want to destroy my marriage. Hell, Barbara, If you love him, why do you cheat? You told me that I'm not the first guy you had an affair with. There was a brief moment of silence. I've asked myself the same question for years, Phil. I guess it's the wrongness of it. The danger, the excitement, the thrill of a new affair. All of that gives me that nearly take my head off. You know how I almost lose it. And Ted doesn't do that for you? Is he that lousy a lover? Is that the reason why you cheat? Ted's a wonderful lover, she snapped at him. It's just not the same. When Ted makes love to me, it's just that. It's wonderful, caring love. But when I'm with a lover, it's wild. Damn it, Phil, enough conversation. Get down and take care of it one more time before you leave. Ted just stood and listened. He then turned, descended the stairs, and moved to the front door. He hesitated and then turned and walked into the kitchen. He removed his wedding band and placed it in the center of the table. He looked at it for a moment, then turned and walked out of the house, not bothering to close the door behind him.